The silence after the storm. The monastery garden awoke shrouded in a light, white mist. Master Kyan watched silently as the lotus flowers, still closed from the morning's dew, trembled gently on the surface of the pond. Beside him, the young monk Ritsu kept his gaze lowered. He had lost his brother a few days ago, and his heart felt like the sky above, colorless, shapeless, and directionless. "Master," Ritsu whispered, "why does the emptiness hurt so much? When something disappears, the soul feels like it's falling into a bottomless pit." Kyan did not answer immediately. He picked up a dry leaf from the ground, placed it on the water, and watched it float slowly. Then he spoke calmly, "Because emptiness cannot be understood with the mind, my child. Emptiness is felt, experienced, and listened to until you realize it is not an enemy, but a mirror." Ritsu lifted his eyes, confused. The master smiled with the tenderness of one who has witnessed many seasons pass. "Everything you love will leave a space," he continued. "But that space is not meant to hurt forever. It is meant to bloom." The wind blew, and the leaf on the pond rotated gently, as if nodding in agreement. The echo of what's gone. Ritsu kept staring at the water, watching the ripples spread from the leaf the master had released. The movement was so gentle it felt like a sigh. "Bloom?" he asked with a trembling voice. "How can something that no longer exists bloom?" Kyan sat on a nearby stone, letting the silence answer for a moment. The song of a solitary bird sounded in the distance, a note refusing to vanish into the air. "Emptiness," he said at last, "is the space where life reorganizes itself. When something or someone leaves, what truly hurts is not their departure, but the place they held within you. That place becomes bare, purposeless, and the mind tries to fill it with memories, questions, or guilt. But if, instead of resisting, you simply observe, you will see that emptiness does not destroy, it prepares." Ritsu lowered his gaze. A knot formed in his chest, a mix of sorrow and fear. "I don't know if I can endure this emptiness, Master. Sometimes it feels like it drags me away, like a dark river." Kyan smiled gently. "Then let it carry you, but do not struggle. Look at that river inside you without trying to escape. Every current, no matter how deep, knows its destiny. The sea. And in the sea, Ritsu, everything reunites again." The young monk closed his eyes. He felt the wind brush his face, and for a moment he thought he heard his brother's voice rustling among the bamboo leaves. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible, yet enough to loosen the weight pressing on his chest. "And what if it never blooms again?" he asked. "Ah, but blooming does not depend on anything returning," Kyan replied calmly. "It depends on what you cultivate in the space that has been left empty. Pain is also a seed, if you know how to plant it with understanding." The master rose slowly, picked up a fallen branch, and planted it in the damp earth. "See," he said, "even a dead fragment can guide the moss to find the sun. So it is also with a heart that has been lost." Ritsu watched, and for the first time since his brother's death, he breathed deeply without fear. He felt something stir deep within him. It was not relief yet, but the first bud of silence, where absence lives. Several days passed in silence. Ritsu began waking before dawn, just as his brother used to do. He lit an oil lamp and swept the temple courtyard calmly, letting the sound of bamboo brushing against stone accompany his thoughts. At first, every corner reminded him of laughter lost, footsteps no longer echoing. But over time, that memory ceased to be an open wound and became an invisible, gentle presence, like a breeze guiding him through the days. One morning, As the sun rose among the cherry trees, Kayan approached and watched the young monk sweep carefully. "Silence has become your companion," the master said. "I had no choice," Ritsu replied without stopping his movements. "If I spoke, the pain answered louder, so I chose to listen." Kayan nodded. When one learns to listen to emptiness, one discovers it is not as empty as it seems. Within it live the echoes of all that has been. Nothing is truly lost, Ritsu. Not gestures, nor laughter, nor farewells. Everything transforms, and if you open your heart, you can hear it bloom in another language. The young monk put down the broom and looked at the master. "Sometimes I feel my brother is still here. Not as before, but in another way. I don't understand it, but sometimes the air seems to speak his name." Kayan smiled with tenderness. "You don't need to understand. The mind seeks proof, but the soul only needs presence. Your brother lives in the form the wind now takes, in the stillness that lets you remember without suffering. That is blooming, allowing what is absent to become the root of something new." Ritsu watched the petals slowly fall to the ground. Each flower seemed to teach him something, that beauty does not cling, loss is not always final, and even what falls remains part of the tree. That morning, as the sun rose over the temple, Ritsu realized that emptiness was not a punishment. It was the space where love could continue breathing. When silence germinates, winter had begun to slowly retreat from the valley. The trees, bare for months, now showed tiny buds on their branches, and the air smelled of damp earth and promise. Ritsu observed this awakening from the temple garden, hands resting on his knees, breathing calm and steady. He had learned to sit without expecting anything, to look without seeking. In that purposeless gaze, he discovered small miracles. The drop of dew unafraid to fall, the ant moving without hurry, the sound of water always finding its course. Master Kayan approached with quiet steps and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Only the whisper of the pines stirred by the wind could be heard. Finally, Ritsu said, "Master, I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant. The emptiness doesn't hurt me as much as before. Sometimes I even feel that there is something alive inside it, as if the pain had turned into a silent root." Kayan smiled. "That's because you stopped fighting the emptiness and started listening to it. Suffering doesn't vanish when you reject it. It vanishes when you embrace it with understanding. Just as a seed must sink into darkness to sprout, so too the heart needs emptiness to bloom." Ritsu took a deep breath. "Before, I thought that losing meant the end. But now I feel that losing can also be a beginning." The master nodded slowly. "When a flower withers, it leaves its fragrance in the air. And even if you no longer see it, a part of it continues to accompany you. Love, Ritsu, does not die, it changes form. What leaves opens space for something new to breathe." The young monk closed his eyes. He felt sunlight filtering through the leaves, warming his skin. For the first time since his loss, his breath was calm, complete. The emptiness that had once weighed on him now felt vast, like a clear sky, a space where he could exist without fear, without longing. "Master," he whispered, "then emptiness also loves?" Kayan responded with an almost imperceptible smile. "Emptiness is the purest form of love, because it asks for nothing in return. It only welcomes." The wind blew gently, stirring the petals scattered across the ground. Some rose briefly, dancing in the air before settling again. Ritsu followed them with his eyes, realizing that life was the same, a dance between what comes and what goes. And in the midst of that dance, silence bloomed within him, the reflection in another heart. One afternoon, the temple received a visitor from the village. She carried her small child in her arms, eyes swollen from crying. The boy had lost his father in a recent flood, and since then he had not spoken. Not a word, not a tear, only silence. Kayan observed from a distance and, without saying anything, gestured for Ritsu to approach. The young monk knelt in front of the boy and looked at him silently. He remembered his own reflection from months ago, the same dense silence, the same lost gaze. For a long while neither spoke. The wind blew through the trees, and the sound of bamboo resonated like a calm heartbeat. Then Ritsu picked up a small stone from the ground and dropped it into the nearby pond. The boy watched. The ripples spread across the water, one after another, until they faded. "See?" Ritsu said softly. "The stone sinks, but the water keeps moving. Love does the same even when we cannot see it." The boy said nothing, but his eyes began to glisten. A tear fell onto his hand, and Ritsu smiled gently. "It's okay to cry," he whispered. "The water that falls also cleanses the heart." The mother covered her face, sobbing with relief. Kayan watched from afar, a slight smile illuminating his face. The master knew that Ritsu had understood the lesson. Emptiness is not overcome by hiding it, but by sharing its silence with those who cannot yet hear it. That night, as the temple lamps glowed softly, Ritsu sat by the pond. The ripples reflected the starry sky. He thought of his brother, the woman, the child, and he realized that the pain he had felt was not in vain. It was the doorway through which he could understand another's sorrow and transform it into tenderness, care, presence. Emptiness, then, was not absence. It was the space where compassion germinates. Ritsu closed his eyes and let the sound of the water lull him. He felt no longing, only gratitude. For what was lost, for what was learned, for the simple fact of still breathing. He thought, emptiness also has roots, and in silence it blooms, the heart like a pond. That night the temple slept in calm. The lamps went out one by one, leaving only the sound of water falling from the stone fountain. Ritsu sat in front of the pond where, months ago, he had poured out his sorrow in the form of tears. He crossed his legs, straightened his back, and closed his eyes. He breathed deeply, felt the air enter like a gentle wave, leaving like a caress. Each breath seemed to erase the boundary between him and the world. The distant song of a cicada, the brush of the wind, the murmur of water, all were part of the same heartbeat. Then he remembered the master's voice. Emptiness does not destroy, it prepares. And he realized that loss, the wound that had torn him apart, had been the soil where his awareness could grow. Without that darkness, he would never have learned to see with such clarity. The silence around him deepened until he could almost hear his thoughts dissolve. There were no names, no faces, no past. Only an immense, luminous stillness that contained everything. In that moment, he saw his brother's face, not as an external image, but as a warm sensation rising from within. His smile was the wind, his voice the murmur of water, and he understood without words that he had never really left. That separation was an illusion woven by the mind to teach the value of union. Ritsu let a tear roll down his cheek, without sadness. It was a tear of gratitude, as if every cell in his body whispered, "Thank you for existing. Thank you for continuing to exist in me." Emptiness no longer frightened him. It was vast, but not cold, silent, yet full of life. It was the same space that breathed between stars, between leaves, between heartbeats. And he was part of that space, part of the whole. When he opened his eyes, the moon reflected on the pond. The ripples formed circles that seemed to expand into infinity. Ritsu smiled. He finally understood that nothing is lost, only transformed. And in that recognition, something inside him bloomed strongly, a peace so deep that even silence seemed to bow before it. Where dawn is born from emptiness, dawn arrived quietly, as if the sky awoke without wanting to break the temple's calm. The first ray of light slipped through the cherry trees, touching the pond that still held the moon's reflection. Ritsu remained there, motionless, but his eyes were open. No longer looking outward or inward, they simply saw. Everything had its perfect place. The song of a bird, the breeze moving the leaves, the stillness of distant mountains, all part of a single invisible symphony. Master Kayan approached silently. He watched his disciple in quiet observation for a long moment. The young monk seemed different, a serene light on his face, a maturity that only understood pain can bring. "You have returned," the master finally said. Ritsu slowly turned his head and smiled. "I'm not sure I returned, master. Perhaps I never left. I only needed to get lost to remember what was always here." Kayan nodded, satisfied. "Then you already know what many seek all their lives." The sun rose over the mountains, gilding the temple's roof. The wind lifted a handful of petals that danced over the water. Ritsu followed them with his eyes and said, in a calm voice, "Emptiness is not darkness. It is the space where life breathes. It is the silence that allows listening, the gap left by one flower so another may bloom, the space between two notes that makes the melody possible." Kayan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "You have learned to see, Ritsu, and when one learns to see, death no longer frightens, for it is understood as only a change in the way love manifests." They remained that way for a long while, watching the sunrise. The master and the disciple, silence and life, emptiness and its flower. Nothing to say, nothing to lose. Only the serene pulse of existence flowing between them. The young monk smiled, and in that gesture was a silent promise. He would no longer flee from loss, because he understood that within it lay the seed of rebirth. And in that instant, the emptiness within him fully blossomed. Emptiness also blooms. That afternoon, the sky filled with a soft golden hue. The wind blew gently through the trees, and the temple bells echoed in the distance, marking the passage of time that no longer hurt. Ritsu walked to the edge of the garden, where the lotus flowers slowly opened over the water. For months, he had observed their cycle, how they rose from the mud, how they emerged pure, how they returned to the pond's silence, and he realized his life was exactly the same. Master Kayan approached and stopped beside him. Neither spoke at first. They simply watched the flowers, listening to the whisper of the wind. Finally, Kayan said softly, "Do you see, Ritsu? Nothing in nature fears emptiness. The tree lets go of its leaves without resistance. The river accepts the shape of its course. The flower opens without fear of withering. All life trusts the space left by what is gone." Ritsu nodded, replying calmly, "Now I understand, Master. Emptiness is not absence. It is the soil where roots grow strong, the silence where understanding is born, the night where the seed learns to hear the earth." Kayan smiled. "Then, my son, do not fear when something departs. Simply bow your head and give thanks. For what leaves does not die. It becomes space for the eternal to breathe." The sun sank behind the mountains, and the light turned golden, almost sacred. Ritsu closed his eyes, letting the wind caress his face. Inside him, emptiness felt full, round, infinite. He no longer needed answers. There was no loss or gain, only a gentle flow. The master walked away silently, leaving his disciple under the last light of day. And there, by the pond, a newly opened lotus seemed to watch everything with eyes of peace. Emptiness also blooms, Ritsu thought, for even in what has gone, life continues to breathe.